Alaska has always been a place where people disappear. Millions of acres of untouched wilderness stretch farther than the eye can see. Endless forests, frozen mountains, rivers that cut through land almost impossible to search. It is a place where nature itself can become deadly. But during the late 1970s and early 1980s, something far more terrifying than the wilderness was hiding among the people of Anchorage. Young women were vanishing. Some were never reported. Others simply seemed to walk away from difficult lives. Police believed many had left town voluntarily. What investigators didn't know was that one ordinary-looking family man had been carefully selecting vulnerable women, abducting them and taking them into the remote Alaskan wilderness. There he transformed the forest into his personal hunting ground. His name was Robert Hansen. For years, no one suspected him. He owned a successful business. He attended church, he was married, he raised children. Neighbors described him as quiet. Customers trusted him. No one imagined that behind that ordinary smile was one of America's most disturbing serial killers. His crimes may never have been uncovered if one victim had not done something almost impossible. She escaped. That single escape would expose years of murder hidden beneath Alaska's vast wilderness. This is the story of Robert Hansen, the man who hunted people. In the late 1970s, Anchorage was growing rapidly. Oil money had transformed Alaska. Workers arrived from across America searching for opportunity. With growth came new nightlife, bars, motels, truck stops, dance clubs. The city also attracted people living on society's margins, runaways, sex workers, women struggling with addiction. Many had little family nearby. Some disappeared without anyone immediately noticing. For investigators, missing person cases were often difficult. Alaska's immense wilderness swallowed evidence. Harsh weather erased footprints. Animals scattered remains. If someone disappeared, there were countless explanations: accidents, exposure, leaving town voluntarily. It created the perfect environment for someone who knew exactly how to exploit it. Robert Christian Hansen did not fit the image of a serial killer. Born in 1939, he grew up in Iowa. His father was strict. Robert often described his childhood as lonely. He suffered from severe acne that left permanent facial scars. He also struggled with a stutter. Classmates bullied him. Girls rarely paid attention to him. These humiliations appeared to leave deep emotional wounds. As he grew older, Hansen developed two lifelong passions: hunting and proving himself. After serving in the military and eventually moving to Alaska, he found exactly the environment he loved: the wilderness. He became an accomplished hunter. Friends admired his tracking skills. He spent countless hours flying into remote areas to hunt large game. His experience navigating Alaska's backcountry would later become central to his crimes. By all appearances, Hansen was successful. He owned a bakery, he married, he raised children, he attended church. Customers knew him as hardworking and dependable. Nothing about his public life suggested unimaginable violence. Yet beneath that ordinary exterior, investigators would later uncover years of carefully hidden crimes. During the late 1970s, reports of missing women slowly accumulated. Many of the victims shared similar circumstances. Several worked in Anchorage's sex trade, others had unstable housing. Some were new arrivals with few local connections. Because of their lifestyles, disappearances often received less attention than those involving other victims. Family members searched, friends worried, but many cases quickly went cold. Then another woman disappeared, and another. Soon investigators began discovering bodies. Some were found in wooded areas. Others were discovered in remote locations outside Anchorage. Several showed evidence suggesting homicide. The killings appeared unrelated at first. Different locations, different victims, very little physical evidence, no obvious suspect. Police had no reason to believe a serial killer was operating, not yet. Medical examinations revealed disturbing similarities. Several victims had been shot. Others displayed evidence of restraint. The remote recovery sites complicated every investigation. Weather damaged evidence, wildlife disturbed remains, time erased critical clues. Each discovery raised more questions than answers. Who transported these women so far into the wilderness? Why were the locations so isolated? How could one person move through Alaska without attracting attention? Investigators searched for connections. None appeared obvious. The killer understood the terrain. He also understood how easily Alaska concealed secrets. Every passing month increased the number of unanswered disappearances. Fear quietly spread among women working Anchorage's streets. Some began refusing certain customers. Others warned each other about strange men, but they didn't yet know exactly whom they feared. Everything changed during the summer of 1983. A young woman named Cindy Paulson accepted a ride with a man who offered her money. Instead of taking her where expected, he drove to his home. Inside, the situation quickly became terrifying. Paulson later told investigators that she was threatened, sexually assaulted, and restrained. At one point, her captor stepped away. She saw a chance. Still wearing only part of her clothing and handcuffed, she ran, barefoot, terrified, straight toward the nearest road. A passing truck driver noticed the frightened young woman desperately signaling for help. He stopped immediately. Paulson climbed inside. Within minutes, police were called. It was the break investigators had needed for years. Paulson provided a detailed description of her attacker. She also described his house, his vehicle, and something even more alarming. She believed her attacker intended to fly her somewhere. Officers soon identified the suspect, the respectable local baker, Robert Hansen. At first glance, detectives found the accusation difficult to believe. Hansen had no public reputation for extreme violence. Friends defended him. Neighbors doubted the allegations. But experienced investigators knew something didn't feel right. One detective in particular refused to dismiss Paulson's story. His persistence would eventually expose one of America's most disturbing serial murder cases. For Anchorage police, Cindy Paulson's account was unlike anything they had heard before. She described being picked up by a quiet, middle-aged man who appeared completely ordinary. Instead of taking her where she expected, he drove her to his house. Once inside, she said she was sexually assaulted and restrained. According to her statement, the man handcuffed her and spoke calmly, almost casually, as though everything had been carefully planned long before she arrived. Then she noticed something unusual. There was an airplane. Her attacker appeared to be preparing to fly her somewhere. Paulson believed that if she got on that plane, she would never come back. When her captor briefly left the room, she seized the opportunity. Still partially dressed and wearing a handcuff on one wrist, she ran out the front door. Barefoot and terrified, she sprinted toward the nearest road. A passing truck driver saw the young woman frantically waving for help and immediately stopped. Within minutes, Anchorage police were responding. Paulson gave officers the name of the man she believed had attacked her, Robert Hansen. Detectives quickly learned who Robert Hansen was. He was 44 years old, a husband, a father, the owner of a successful bakery. He attended church regularly. Friends described him as quiet and hardworking. He was also an experienced outdoorsman. Hansen loved hunting. He owned multiple firearms. He held a pilot's license and frequently flew his small aircraft into Alaska's remote wilderness in search of game. Nothing in his public life resembled the violent predator Paulson had described. When officers questioned Hansen, he denied everything. He claimed that Paulson had fabricated the story after a dispute over payment for sexual services. To some investigators, his explanation seemed plausible. Paulson had a criminal record and worked as a sex worker. In the early 1980s, women in similar circumstances were often viewed as unreliable witnesses. As a result, Hansen was released. The investigation appeared to stall almost as quickly as it had begun. But one detective refused to let the case end there. The lead investigator, Glenn Floth, couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Paulson's account contained details that seemed too specific to invent. She accurately described Hansen's home, his vehicle, his aircraft. Most importantly, her overwhelming fear felt genuine. Floth began reviewing unsolved homicide files involving missing women from previous years. As he compared reports, unsettling similarities began to emerge. Many victims had disappeared after last being seen in Anchorage. Several worked in the city's sex trade. Many had vanished without witnesses. Some had later been found in isolated wilderness locations. Others had never been found at all. The pattern wasn't yet enough to prove anything, but it was enough to keep looking. Floth sought help from another investigator with experience studying serial offenders. That decision would dramatically change the direction of the investigation. Detective Floth contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation for assistance. The case reached Johnny Douglas, one of the pioneers of criminal profiling. Douglas reviewed every available report: victim histories, crime scene photographs, missing person files, autopsy findings. He also examined what little investigators knew about Robert Hansen. Douglas believed the murders were not random. He concluded that the offender was likely an experienced hunter, someone comfortable navigating remote wilderness, someone who preferred complete control over victims, someone who carefully selected women society often overlooked. As Douglas continued reviewing the evidence, one detail stood out. The bodies had been discovered far from roads. Many locations could only be reached by someone with exceptional knowledge of Alaska or by airplane. Then investigators remembered something. Robert Hansen owned his own aircraft. The profile aligned almost perfectly with the quiet baker. Although profiling alone could never prove guilt, it strengthened investigators' belief that they were looking in the right direction. Armed with new information, detectives obtained warrants to search Hansen's property. Inside his home, investigators began documenting everything: firearms, maps, personal records, jewelry, hidden possessions. Then they discovered something that immediately captured their attention: a detailed aviation map of Alaska. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Pilots commonly carried maps marking lakes, mountains, and landing areas, but this map was different. Scattered across it were numerous small symbols and markings. Each one appeared carefully placed. Detectives wondered what they represented: fishing spots, hunting locations, or something far more disturbing. The map was collected as evidence. Investigators would later compare those markings with known locations where victims had been discovered. The results were chilling. Several markings closely matched areas connected to missing or murdered women. For detectives, the investigation had reached a turning point. The evidence was still circumstantial, but the pieces were beginning to fit together. As investigators dug deeper into Hansen's past, older incidents resurfaced. They learned he had previously been arrested for offenses, including burglary years earlier. There had also been reports involving assaults against women. Individually, none of these incidents proved he was a serial killer. Together, however, they suggested a history of escalating violence. Detectives also interviewed women who had survived encounters with Hansen. Some described uncomfortable experiences. Others recalled accepting rides from him before managing to leave safely. Gradually, investigators built a clearer picture. The attacks appeared planned. Victims were selected carefully. The offender targeted women he believed would be less likely to be believed if they escaped. It was a calculated strategy. For years, it had worked, until Cindy Paulson survived. By late 1983, detectives believed they finally had enough evidence to confront Hansen once again. The aviation map, ballistic evidence linking one of Hansen's rifles to a victim, Paulson's identification, the behavioral profile, the growing pattern of disappearances. Each piece alone was not enough. Together, they painted an increasingly compelling picture. Investigators prepared for another interrogation. This time, they intended to confront Hansen with everything they had uncovered. The quiet baker who had spent years hiding behind an ordinary life was about to face the most important conversation of his life. What happened next would expose one of the darkest criminal cases in Alaska's history. By the fall of 1983, investigators believed they had assembled a case that Robert Hansen could no longer explain away. The statements from Cindy Paulson remained consistent. The map recovered from Hansen's home contained markings that corresponded to locations connected with victims and evidence. Ballistics testing linked a rifle owned by Hansen to the death of one of the victims. Detectives had also uncovered jewelry belonging to missing women during the search of his property. Individually, each piece of evidence could be challenged. Together, they formed a compelling picture. Investigators brought Hansen in for another interview. At first, he remained calm. He denied murdering anyone. He insisted he was simply being targeted because of Paulson's accusations. But this time, detectives presented the evidence one piece at a time. Each answer Hansen gave created new contradictions. The pressure slowly began to mount. Recognizing that Hansen was unlikely to confess without additional leverage, investigators turned once again to Johnny Douglas, whose understanding of violent offenders had already helped shape the investigation. Douglas believed Hansen's greatest concern was preserving some control over his future. If confronted with overwhelming evidence and the possibility of spending the rest of his life fighting a losing case, he might decide that cooperation offered his best chance. The strategy worked. After hours of questioning, Hansen finally began to talk. His confession revealed a pattern of violence far more disturbing than investigators had imagined. He admitted that over several years he had targeted women who were especially vulnerable. Many were involved in sex work. Others had unstable living situations or little family support. He believed their disappearances would attract less attention. According to Hansen, he would approach women in Anchorage, offering money or transportation. Once they were under his control, he would force them into his vehicle. He then transported many of them to his private aircraft. Using his experience as a pilot, Hansen flew his victims into isolated areas of Alaska that few people ever visited. The wilderness became his weapon. Once there, he assaulted them. In some cases, he released them into the forest before pursuing them with a hunting rifle. Investigators concluded that Hansen treated these women as though they were game animals rather than human beings. His years of hunting wildlife had become intertwined with fantasies of domination and control. For years, Alaska's vast wilderness had hidden his crimes. Now, the truth was finally emerging. Following Hansen's confession, investigators organized search teams to recover victims whose locations had remained unknown. Guided by information he provided, officers traveled deep into the Alaskan wilderness. Many locations could only be reached by aircraft. The terrain was unforgiving: dense forests, marshland, mountain valleys, gravel riverbanks. Despite the difficult conditions, investigators located additional human remains. Each discovery brought long-awaited answers for families who had spent years wondering what had happened to their loved ones. In total, authorities concluded that Hansen had murdered at least 17 women between 1971 and 1983. Investigators believed there may have been additional victims whose remains were never recovered. Even today, some questions remain unanswered. The sheer size of Alaska makes it impossible to know with certainty whether every crime scene was ever found. Faced with overwhelming evidence and his own admissions, Hansen agreed to a plea agreement. In 1984, he pleaded guilty to multiple murder charges, as well as kidnapping and sexual assault offenses. The agreement spared the victims' families the ordeal of a lengthy trial while ensuring that Hansen would never again be free. The court sentenced him to life in prison with additional consecutive terms for the other crimes. For the families of the victims, no sentence could undo years of loss. Many had waited for answers while wondering whether their daughters, sisters, or friends had simply disappeared. Now they finally knew the truth. The quiet baker who had appeared so ordinary had spent years living a double life. Outside the courtroom, investigators reflected on how close Hansen had come to escaping justice. Had Cindy Paulson not escaped, the murders might have continued. The investigation is remembered not only because of the crimes, but because one victim survived. Cindy Paulson's escape changed everything. She ran despite being terrified. She reported the attack. She identified her attacker. Even after some people questioned her credibility, she continued telling investigators exactly what had happened. Without her determination, authorities might never have focused on Robert Hansen. Her testimony became the turning point in one of Alaska's largest serial murder investigations. Her courage saved lives. It also gave a voice to women whose disappearances had too often been overlooked. The Hansen investigation forced law enforcement agencies to confront uncomfortable realities. Many of his victims had been dismissed because of their occupations or personal circumstances. Their disappearances did not always receive the same urgency as other missing person cases. The case became a powerful reminder that every victim deserves the same level of attention and investigation. It also demonstrated the value of cooperation between local detectives, forensic specialists, and behavioral analysts. The persistence of Detective Glenn Flood, combined with the investigative support of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, ultimately uncovered a pattern that had remained hidden for years. Modern investigative techniques, including behavioral analysis and improved coordination between agencies, have since become standard tools in many serial crime investigations. For years, Robert Hansen believed Alaska's wilderness would protect him. He counted on distance, on isolation, on the assumption that no one would connect the missing women whose lives had quietly disappeared into the forest. Instead, the very evidence he believed was hidden eventually led investigators back to him. A map, a rifle, a survivor who refused to stay silent. Robert Hansen spent the remainder of his life in prison, where he died in 2014 while serving his sentence. His crimes remain among the most disturbing in American criminal history, not only because of their brutality, but because of the calculated way he used Alaska's vast landscape as part of his method. Today, the names and lives of his victims remain at the center of the story. They were daughters, friends, sisters, women whose lives mattered, regardless of their circumstances. Their stories continue to serve as a reminder that justice often begins with someone willing to listen when others are ignored. The Robert Hansen case changed homicide investigations in Alaska forever and stands as a lasting example of how persistence, careful police work, and the courage of a single survivor can expose even the most carefully concealed crimes. Kindly turn your click to kindness by subscribing, like, and comment. Thank you for watching. If you found this documentary informative, consider subscribing for more carefully researched true crime stories based on verified facts, court records, and official investigations. Until next time, stay informed, stay vigilant, and remember that the most unsettling mysteries are often the ones hidden in plain sight.